Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be giving my thoughts on all elements of the Crew Motorfest after playing the game for at least 15 hours of playtime over the last 2 and a bit weeks. I'll be covering everything from the handling to the car list, to the campaign, to the online, as well as what I think of the game as a whole. Starting with the main single-player campaign, which consists of 15 different themed playlists, although at this point I still have several of them yet to play. I have found so far that each one takes roughly an hour to complete, so there's 15 hours of content there in total, which I don't think is too bad, although I know a few people seem to have complaints about the length of the campaign, saying there's too much to do. But I disagree. I think games often don't have enough to do these days, so it is good that there's a lot to get through before you get to the sort of end game content, because otherwise games get pretty boring pretty quickly. I do like that there is plenty of content to keep me playing already, before they've even started adding more content, which apparently will include the addition of more playlists as we go along, but only one every 3 or 4 months or so, I think, to begin with. So far, it's been an enjoyable campaign, the bit I have played, and I really love how different the themed playlists are to each other. They're not repetitive like a lot of other games seem to fall into the trap of being with their campaigns. So yeah, they're all completely different, and the way each theme is captured so well, with the different props and lighting and everything, makes them all have a really unique theme, and I think each one fits the theme that it's based on really, really well. I love how they've done that. The biggest complaint I have about the campaign is actually the inconsistency of the difficulty. I did think for a while this might just be because I'm better at tarmac events than off-road and drag racing. I had it set to the hardest difficulty, but then to 4 out of 5 within that difficulty. And yeah, for the tarmac events that was perfect. If anything, a bit easy, but off-road and drag racing wasn't. But it wasn't just that. Even some of the more standard tarmac races seem to be a lot more difficult than others, so I don't know quite what's going on there, just seems inconsistent in difficulty. Next, let's talk about what is arguably the most important part of any racing game: the cars themselves. The car list, or rather vehicle list, consists of around 600 vehicles in total, including the addition of Toyota, which has finally been licensed for the first time in The Crew, not being in the previous 2 games at all, as well as the addition of several exciting new cars like the Lamborghini Revuelto and the McLaren Elva. It's not all good news here, though. Although Toyota was added as a new brand, there are several brands missing, most of them owned by Stellantis. Abarth, Alfa Romeo and Lancia are all absent from this latest game, which is a shame because although these brands have been being particularly difficult with licensing, it was seeming like more recently they were starting to return to more games, being added back into Forza and being showcased in a test drive trailer and stuff. But apparently it wasn't possible here. I mean, to be fair, at the time they were licensing cars for this game, they probably were still being difficult. So, yeah, hopefully they will return in future like they have to Forza. That's not all, though. The bike brand MV Augusta and Extreme Air Planes are also missing, as well as several other quite random but unexpected cars have gone missing, like the Golf R and some BMWs like the M3, and a few more in there. So it's a bit odd, but yeah, there are some random cars missing, as well as the whole brands that have been taken out, which is probably due to licensing. They've also removed several entire vehicle types, like several categories of plane, the hovercrafts, the only helicopter in the Crew 2, and some of the other fictional vehicles, as they seem to be trying to shift the main focus back onto cars rather than all the other vehicles that we had in the Crew 2, as cars always remained by far the most popular vehicles in that game, as you might expect. All of the vehicles are still priced extortionately, but unlike the Crew 2, in this game you earn quite a lot more from races and other activities, so it doesn't take anywhere near as long to save up for anything. Also, being able to import all of our cars to the Crew 2 was super helpful, saved me buying a whole load of stuff, and helped to obviously not lose all of the progress from that game, which is usually what happens every time a new game comes out. But yeah, I'm super happy about that in the end, because, well, I put quite a lot of time into getting cars in that game, and I still had nowhere near whole lot, so it's good to have a good start in this game that I can then build upon. Initially, I wasn't sure about this as I kind of wanted to progress properly through the game, and I did do that for the first couple of hours, but after that I ended up importing my collection, and that was kind of sooner than I expected it to, and it is great to be able to use some of my favourite cars again, because it has been quite a while since I've played the Crew 2 properly. Okay then, now on to the subject of online. Starting, of course, with the controversial topic of cross-platform online play. For those who have missed this, this game was supposed to be cross-platform, and it isn't truly cross-platform as it was originally advertised. So, as you can imagine, a lot of people are very angry, and some of them are wanting their money back. For those who have missed this, basically, in the marketing before the game came out, the developers, Ivory Tower, said you could, and I quote, play online with friends on other platforms. Which you can't, really, as there is no free roam cross-platform play, so you can't invite people into your game, into your crew, and drive the island with them. You can't therefore invite any friends from other platforms to your game at all. In fact, the only cross-platform elements are the Grand Race, the huge online chaos event, and the Demolition Derby, and all of the leaderboards, of course, which are with random players online, and not with friends from other platforms at all. They're with random people. There's almost no way to get your friends into a game with you, unless somehow you're lucky enough to get into the same Grand Race or something with them, which is very, very unlikely. So it is kind of cross-platform in some ways, but the way they worded it to sound like you could invite friends was misleading at the least. So yeah, it certainly appears like this was intentionally left unclear, and a lot of players bought the game on the basis that they could invite friends from other platforms to their crew to drive the island with them. I really hope that they add cross-platform crews and free roam in one of their many updates in the future. It should at least be a possibility, as cross-platform is partly in the game already for some modes, like I said, so it shouldn't be too difficult to expand that to be crews and free roam, I hope, and I really hope they do it, because yeah, it's not good the way this has been advertised, when it's not strictly true, the way they worded it at least. Even if you're in the same platform, crews are limited to 4 players, so it's very limited anyway, and at the time of recording this, it's kind of hit and miss as to whether you can actually see somebody that you've invited into your game or not. They keep vanishing, so yeah, hopefully this all gets smoothed out. A lot of games seem to be like this at launch these days, but yeah, there are quite a few things that they need to fix and improve here if this game's going to have enough for us to do after we've completed that quite long campaign. The actual online PvP game modes, though, are really, really good. Firstly, there's the Grand Race, which is a huge race in 3 different disciplines of car, automatically switching at 1/3 and 2/3 into the race. But these are super fun, huge lobbies, absolute madness. So if you like chaotic online racing and lots of crashing into each other, is brilliant, brilliant fun. Not to be taken too seriously, but always a laugh to go into those. And there's also the Demolition Royale, which is kind of essentially the destruction-y cars from the Crew 2, driving around in a big zone, Fortnite style, being dropped in from an aeroplane, and then crashing into each other with power-ups and things. So you've got a crashy grand race with many people in, and a crashy demolition style race where event where you're supposed to crash into each other. And both of them so far have been excellent fun. Now, the map. I think the map's brilliant, partially because it's set on the Hawaiian island of Oahu, just like Test Drive Unlimited was, and part of Test Drive Unlimited 2 was, and it brings back all the memories of playing these 2 pioneers of the open world racing game genre, whilst not feeling the same as them. It does have a lot of differences. It feels completely different, but still brings back the memories of playing those. The Test Drive games were 1-to-1 scale replicas of the island, though, so this is substantially smaller than those games were, as well as being substantially smaller than the Crew 2's interpretation of the whole of the USA. But don't forget, this game was originally supposed to be an expansion for the Crew 2, so we're not expecting it to be a huge map. While some people have complained about the size of the map though, personally I think it's pretty good anyway, as even as a standalone game, it is only about 8 miles from top to bottom probably, but I've still found it really fun so far, and I don't feel like I've driven all of it, even though I've gone for a good explore of the island. I guess it could become a bit repetitive though after this game's been out for longer. We'll have to wait and see. What I'm trying to say though is that a smaller map isn't necessarily worse. Some games like Forza Horizon 5 for example have a huge map, but most of it is a huge empty desert, which is incredibly boring and of course means you can't remember your name. This map though, although it is smaller than the Crew 2 and the test drive games, does have much better detail and is much more full than the predecessor to this game. There are much less copy and pasted buildings than either of those games, and it generally just feels a bit more polished than the Crew 2 did as a whole map. On to another important topic when it comes to the Crew titles, the handling and physics of the cars, which left a lot to be desired in the Crew 2, at launch at least. Apparently this has improved a bit since then, but I haven't really played enough of it recently to truly comment on that. Compared to how I remember that game being though, this is a massive improvement. It's moved to being slightly closer to how Forza Horizon feels, for example, while still retaining its overall feel from before, and having its own unique kind of feeling to it. It doesn't feel like that game, it just has moved slightly more in that direction, I would say. I would say though that I find this game handles better than its closest rival, Need for Speed. I certainly found it a lot more enjoyable. Generally cars are less twitchy than that game, and the Crew 2. Other streaming services are of course available. Before they would randomly snap and cause a big crash and just be generally unstable, and I found them super unpredictable. That seems to have gone a bit. Seems to be much improved, which means particularly in drift events, I noticed that the cars felt a lot better than how I remembered them being in the Crew 2. It is still of course very arcadey, even compared to Forza Horizon 5, but it's got a little bit more realistic I think, and I think it's made it a lot more enjoyable than before. And finally, last but definitely not least, the graphics. How does this game look? Well, mostly it looks very good. It is a beautiful game. It's not quite on the level of a Gran Turismo or a Forza Horizon game, for example, but it's a different style, so it's really hard to compare, and it is very good. Mostly. There's one really irritating thing that I've noticed, and it's a weird ghosting behind your car that sometimes appears. It's only occasionally, but when it's there, it's very irritating. Only seems to happen in certain lights and weathers, in certain combinations. I have noticed this when playing, but I've also seen it in other people's footage, so it isn't just the way I've got my settings. I'm playing on PC, but I have also noticed it on console footage that I've watched. This is to do with the temporal anti-aliasing, or TAA, which you can't turn off. The only options for this are TAA on its own, or TAA in combination with FXAA, I think it is, both of which seem to have this problem. This is particularly irritating as the Crew 2, its default setting was just to use the FXAA anti-aliasing, which looked so much better, and this ghosting never happened. I don't think this also happens in the Crew 2, as far as I know. It's certainly not noticeable like it is in Motorfest, unfortunately. But yeah, other than that one tiny thing, it looks really good. And like a few of my other complaints, I hope this can be resolved in a future update. All they need to do is add an option to the graphics setting of just FXAA, just being able to turn that type of anti-aliasing off would be great, just as an option. So overall I would say that this is a super fun open world arcade racer, which will hopefully keep me entertained until the release of the highly anticipated Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, which supposedly launches in 2024. The campaign I think is very well done, with a lot of variety in the different themed playlists, which there are plenty of, giving at least 15 hours of content before you even get into the online stuff and kind of post-launch content, which will inevitably be added down the line. This game does have its flaws though, the biggest being the cross-platform, which was misleadingly advertised as being much more complete than it actually is. There are also several important brands and cars absent, and the whole vehicle types that have been removed are just a bit of a shame to have missing. This is somewhat countered by the addition of Toyota, finally, as well as several new and quite exciting supercars and hypercars. The handling and physics are an improvement over the previous game, and I think more enjoyable than this game's biggest rival, Need for Speed. And whilst the map is smaller than the Crew 2, it does have much better detail and less copied and pasted bits, making it feel much more polished as a game. And the graphics mostly look very good, apart from that one small complaint I have about the anti-aliasing. Like I say though, overall it's a super fun open world arcade racer, which will hopefully give me something new and exciting to play until Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown releases next year, and, well, if you're waiting for that game, I really would recommend picking this up to play in the meantime. It's a super fun open world game. I've really enjoyed it so far and have plenty more campaign to play through, and by the time I've completed it, I'm sure it won't be long until they start adding post-launch content, which if the Crew 2 is anything to go by, will continue for years to come. For now though, that is going to be all, so thank you very much for watching, and I will be back with the next video very soon.